This is Your Anxiety Toolkit, episode number 219. Welcome to Your Anxiety Toolkit. I'm your host, Kimberley Quinlan. This podcast is fueled by three main goals. The first goal is to provide you with some extra tools to help you manage your anxiety. Second goal, to inspire you. Anxiety doesn't get to decide how you live your life. And number three, and I leave the best for last, is to provide you with one big, fat virtual hug. Because experiencing anxiety ain't easy. If that sounds good to you, let's go. Welcome back, everybody. I am thrilled to have you here with me today. You may notice that the podcast looks a little different. That is on purpose. We have decided to update the cover of the podcast. It now has my face on it. There were a lot of people who had reached out and said that the old podcast cover art looked like a gardening podcast. And I thought it was probably time I updated it. So that was something that I had created years and years and years ago. And I'm so thrilled to have now a very beautiful new cover art. Okay. This episode is so important. I cannot stress to you how overjoyed I was to have the amazing Amanda White on the podcast. She's a psychotherapist. She's on Instagram under the handle Therapy for Women. She's so empowering, and she talks a lot about your relationship with substance use, particularly alcohol. But in this episode, we talk about many substances. And this is a conversation I feel we need to have more of because there are a lot of people who are trying to manage their anxiety and they end up using alcohol to cope. Now, this is a complete shame-free episode. In fact, one of the things I love about Amanda is she really does not subscribe to having to do a 100% sobriety method. She really talks about how you can create a relationship with alcohol based on whatever you think is right. And she has a new book out, which I am so excited that she's going to share with you all about. Before we get into the episode, I'd first like to do the review of the week. Here we go. We have this one from Epic 5000 Cloud9, and they said, "It is a beautiful day to do hard things. This podcast has absolutely changed my life and made my recovery journey feel possible. After completing ERP, I felt lost and confused as to why I did not feel quote unquote better. Kimberley has given me so many tools to build my self-compassion, grow my mindfulness skills, manage OCD, and do all the hard things." So amazing. I'm so grateful to have you on in our community, Epic 5000 Cloud9. So happy to have you be a part of our little wonderful group of badass human beings. I love it. Let's go right over to the show, and so you can learn all about Amanda and this beautiful, beautiful conversation. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Well, thank you, Amanda, for being here. I'm actually so grateful for you because you've actually brought to my attention a topic I've never talked about. And so I'm so happy to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Kimberly. I'm excited to chat with you.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about you first. Like, who are you? What do you do? What's your mission?
Yeah, so my name's Amanda White. I am a licensed therapist. You might know me on Instagram from Therapy for Women is my handle. I'm also sober, and I'm really on a mission to kind of destigmatize sobriety and destigmatize the idea that you can question your relationship with alcohol. And it's really kind of why my Instagram page and everything I do isn't sober only focused, because I want it to be something where people who maybe aren't necessarily sober or haven't thought about it can, in a safe, unstigmatizing, unpressured way, also explore their relationship with alcohol. And that is what led me to write a book. And my book is called Not Drinking Tonight.
So good. So I already have like so many questions. Why wouldn't one question their relationship with alcohol? Like because what I will bring here is a little culture is I'm Australian.
Yeah, I was
I
going to
live I
say.
live in America. The culture around drinking is much different. I have some great friends in England. The culture there is much different. So do you want to share a little bit about why one wouldn't maybe question their relationship with drinking?
Absolutely. I think, I can only speak for America specifically, but I know enough people in England and Australia too that there is a culture of drinking is good, drinking is normal. We watch our parents or adults drink when we're young. We think that's what makes us an adult. If you look at the media, you look at movies, TV shows, it's what everyone does when they're stressed. Women pour themselves a glass of wine, men pour themselves like a bourbon. So I think that we're just raised in the society that doesn't ever question their drinking because alcohol use is so black and white, where you either are normal and you should drink alcohol and it's what's expected, or you're an alcoholic and you should never drink alcohol. And there isn't a lot of space in between. So if someone questions their alcohol use, people assume that they're an alcoholic.
And so now what let me ask is like, why would we question our relationship? Like what was that process like for you? Why would we want to do that? Some people haven't, I think, even considered it. So can you share a little bit about why we might want to?
Absolutely. I think it isn't talked about enough of how much alcohol really negatively impacts your mental health. For a while, I know doctors used to talk about there are some heart healthy benefits of alcohol, which new studies say is not true. There really aren't any benefits to drinking alcohol in terms of our health. But really, I think especially anxiety and alcohol are so intertwined, and people don't talk about it and don't think about it. And what I want people to know is when you drink alcohol, it's a depressant and your brain produces chemicals because your brain always wants to be in homeostasis. So your brain produces anxiety chemicals like cortisol and stuff like that to try to rebalance into homeostasis. And after alcohol leaves your body, anxiety hormones are still in there, and it creates the phenomenon where you end up being more anxious after you drink. There's other mental health effects too, but I feel like especially on this podcast, it's so important that people realize how intertwined alcohol and anxiety is.
Right. You know what's interesting is I do a pretty good amount of assessment with my patients,
Yeah.
but really often I will have seen them for many months before. And even though I've thought I've assessed them for, substance use and
Mhm.
not even abuse, they will then say and realize, like, I think I'm actually using alcohol more than I thought to manage my anxiety. And I'm always really shocked because I'm like, I swore I assessed you for this, but I think it takes some people time during recovery to sort of start to see like, wow, I think there is an unhealthy relationship going here. Is that the case from what you see, or is that more my population?
No, absolutely. And I think, because I think it's easy to kind of lie to yourself, maybe not even lie, just like not look at it, because again, it's so normalized, because we have an idea in our head of what someone with a problem with alcohol looks like. We don't consider ourselves to have that problem. But just because, right, like we aren't drinking every day or we're not blacking out or something like that, doesn't mean that we might not be using it to numb, to cope with anxiety, to deal with stress.
Right. You know what's funny is this could be my personal, or maybe it is a cultural thing, because I always want to like catch whether it's an Australian thing or a Kimberley thing. is is I remember, I think, hearing, but maybe I misinterpreted it as a young child, that you're only an alcoholic if you get aggressive when you drink,
Mm.
and that if you're a happy drunk, you're not a drunk. You know what I mean? And that it's not a bad thing. If it makes you happy and it takes the stress away, that's actually a good coping. So I remember learning like in as a teen of like, oh, you get to question like what is an alcoholic and what's substance abuse and what's not. So how would you define substance use versus substance abuse? Or do you
Absolutely.
even use that language?
I mean, yes and no. Like I use it in terms of it exists. right? And it is part of the DSM. So it is in terms of I do diagnose when needed and things like that. A lot of times, though, I think the current narrative, and I think people spend so much time trying to figure out if it's
Mm,
use or
mm,
misuse, that they miss out on the most important question, which to me is alcohol making my life better?
yeah.
And if it's not, if it's right, I have exercises in my book and I talk a lot about like what are the costs of drinking and what are the payoffs. And if it's costing you a lot or it's costing you more than it's bringing to your life, I think that is where you should question it. And I think,
Mm,
your life can change. You can go through different things in your life, and maybe that's when you can ebb and flow with your questioning of it. But especially people get so obsessed with the idea of whether they're an alcoholic or not. And the term alcoholic is completely outdated. It's not even a diagnosis anymore. Like it's now a spectrum.
mm.
So to me, that word is just so outdated and unhelpful to think about, really.
Right. And even the word abuse has stigma to it too, doesn't it?
It
Yeah.
does. And now, right, like in the DSM, it's alcohol use disorder and it's mild, moderate, and severe. But it's wild thinking back. I mean, I was in grad school. Oh my gosh, I'm going to date. I don't even know how long ago, 10 years ago, I
Don't
think.
tell them. Don't tell them.
A certain amount of time ago,
Once
not
upon a
that
time.
long ago. And right, like I just remember being in addictions class, as it was called, and we were talking about, right, what is the difference between use and abuse, and what makes someone an alcoholic. And I think people also get very attached to being dependent
Mhm.
means it's abuse.
Mhm.
And it takes a lot to become dependent on alcohol physically. So we're just missing out on so many people. I say often we can question so many things in our life, like I'm sure you do too with your clients. Like I question how their sleep habits interact with their mental health. We talk about how, getting outside impacts their mental health, all these different factors. But for some reason with alcohol, which is a drug, we don't question it, or
Right.
we're not allowed to.
Right. Yes. Yes. I think, I will address this for
Yeah.
for the listeners is I think with my clients, one of the most profound road, like if we come to the edge of the road and we have to decide which direction, the thing that really gets in the way is if I put a name to it, then I have to stop.
Yeah.
And that can be a lot of times they won't even want to bring it up be in fear of saying, well, like you were saying before, is like, is that meaning now if as soon as I admit to having a problem, does that mean I'm in AA? Like what
Yeah.
does that is it black and white? Like I think that there's so much fear around what it means once we really define whether it's helpful or problematic. That can be a scary step.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's why I really believe in looking at it as a spectrum, especially, I think about disordered eating, right? Is kind of like we know that based on studies, if someone engages in disordered eating, they're more likely to develop an eating disorder. So in my book, I kind of coined this term disordered drinking, and how I
Mm,
really think we need that term where people can it makes the barrier to questioning your relationship with alcohol much lower. Where I find in my practice, because I work with a lot of people with eating disorders, people are very open about saying, yeah, like I'm maybe engaging in some unhealthy disordered eating, I don't know. But there's a whole step there before maybe you recognize that you have an
mm,
eating disorder, where
mm.
I really think that is what we need with alcohol. We need to be able to talk about how, like, yeah, most of us in college like engage in disordered drinking. Like it's not
Mhm.
super healthy the way that
Right.
we drink, right? Or we may go through a period of time in our life because we're super stressed or something's going on where we engage in that. And that doesn't
Mm.
mean that you have for sure like a substance use disorder or you're addicted or you have to never drink again. But I think it's important to recognize when we start to fall into that so we can change that pattern.
Right. Particularly with COVID, I mean, alcohol
Absolutely.
consumption is, I think, doubled or something like that in some countries. So,
Yes.
and I think too. I mean, when we're struggling like COVID, that we have less access to good tools and less access to social, so people are relying on substances and so forth. Yeah. So
Absolutely.
what is the solution? There you go. There you go. Tell me all your answers. What is the options? How
Yeah.
might somebody move into this conversation with themselves or with their partner or with their therapist? What are the steps from here, do you think?
Yeah. So I think that the first step is to try to take a break. I think that I think 30 days is a good starting point. A lot of times, if people just start off by cutting back, they don't really get any of the positive feel good benefits of taking a break, which is why I recommend starting with taking a break first. Obviously, I believe in harm reduction. And if you are in a place where you can't take a break, moderation is definitely, a good tool and better than nothing.
Can you tell what harm reduction for those who don't know what that
Yes.
means?
Yeah. So harm reduction is the idea that rather than focusing on completely eliminating a behavior or especially completely eliminating like a substance, is we think about cutting back on that. And I think about specifically if someone is in like an abusive situation, if someone has a lot of trauma going on, and alcohol is like the one thing that's like keeping them afloat. That to me is like, of course, I'm not going to say you must quit cold turkey or something like
Right.
that. And even
Okay.
if we're talking about, alcohol is very dangerous to physically detox from if you are drinking every day, which a lot of people don't know. In those cases, yeah, it's really important to get support and detox in a
Yeah.
safe environment.
Right. Okay. So sorry I cut you off. Take a
No,
break.
that's okay. Yeah, so that's what harm reduction is. But yeah, in general, I recommend starting with taking a 30-day break, seeing how that goes, see how your health improves, see how your anxiety might be reduced and improve. And really, to me, the goal is to learn how to live your life without being dependent on alcohol. Because if we can't process our emotions, set boundaries, socialize, go on dates, whatever, without the help of alcohol, we never really have freedom of choice over drinking or not drinking because we need it on some level. So my whole, goal is for people to learn how to do some of those skills so that they don't have to rely on alcohol, and then they can use alcohol in a healthier way for celebrating or in a way that like positively impacts their life, and they don't use it kind of as like a crutch.
That's so helpful. So I'm pretty well versed in this, but I wouldn't
Yeah.
say I'm a specialist. So I'm really curious. So if somebody is using alcohol or any other substance to manage their anxiety, would you teach them skills before they take the break so that they have the skills for the break? Or would you just start to take the break and then pick up what gets lost there? Like what might be some steps and what skills may you teach them?
I think it's a bit of both. I think if you only teach skills before, someone might never take the break, which is fine, right? But I think if you are only teaching the skills, a lot of times the skills, like I think that's really good to start before you take the break so you
Mhm.
can learn how to start dealing with your emotions maybe without drinking, for example. But some of the other stuff, like going to a party without drinking, is kind of something where if you don't actually take that step, it's probably unlikely that you're ever going to do it until you've
Yeah.
kind of pushed yourself to take that break.
Yeah.
But in general, yeah, I mean, I think one of the most important ones is learning how to cope with your emotions.
Mhm.
People use alcohol all the time, especially alcohol becomes kind of a way to deal with loneliness, to deal with stress, to deal with sadness. And I think
Social anxiety is a big
social
one.
anxiety, absolutely. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of us literally don't know how to process an emotion, say no, set that boundary, like
Mm.
take care of themselves on a basic level without drinking. So those are some
Right.
of the skills I think are really important to learn.
I mean, yeah, I think it's and for a lot of the folks that I see, because their anxiety is so high, would you say they're using it to top off that anxiety to try and reduce it? in the case where if you're not drinking, you're having high states of anxiety, is there any shifts that you would have them go through besides general anxiety management?
I think the example I'm thinking of is maybe like social anxiety. Like if there's
Mm.
a specific instance, right? Like I know you talk about this a lot on Instagram, is like exposures can really, really help with reducing anxiety. And I think there are steps that you can take that are small. Like if you have a lot of social anxiety about going to a party and not drinking, for example, and you're relying on alcohol to deal with going to a party. I mean, some of the things off the top of my head I can think about are like driving to the place where the party is before it happens, talking to someone who is going to be at the party, kind of taking
Mm.
these small steps to desensitize yourself to it so you can build up your tolerance before you go. Or maybe you go, if this is the first year, and you only stay for a short period of time rather than going from nothing to expecting yourself to go and have fun and stay at the whole party the whole time.
What was your experience, if you don't mind sharing? Like, what were those 30 days like? Or can you kind of share it, like, put us in your shoes for a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I struggled a lot with an eating disorder, and I kept relapsing in my eating disorder when I would drink. And my therapist, and I kind of had said to my therapist at the time, I think that I might, have a problem with alcohol. I don't know. And she recommended me do those 30 days. And it was really, really hard for me. I didn't actually make it to the first 30 days when I originally tried, because I was so afraid of the pushback of friends, of people asking me why, of not being able to be fun. A huge part of my identity at that time was all wrapped up in what people thought of me and going out and kind of being the fun, crazy one. So I think that's a
That's
big
interesting.
barrier.
Yeah, and it's interesting how the different experience, because I too had an eating disorder, but
Yeah.
my eating disorder wouldn't let me drink.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
like, that would be letting go of control, and I might, what
Mhm.
if I binge, and what if I, like, ingest too many calories? So it's funny how different disorders play out in different ways. It was actually an exposure for me to drink
You drink,
and
yeah.
eat what we quote, I think I'd heard so many times, like, empty calories or something.
Yes.
So it was like that was a different exposure for me
Mhm.
of that, but I can totally see how other people, of course, again, and it does. I mean, I think that this is interesting in your book. You talk about the pros and the cons. It does make it easier to be in public,
Yeah,
right? It
absolutely.
does, quote unquote, work in some settings until it doesn't.
Exactly. And I
Yeah.
think that's so important to normalize. And it's part of why I wrote my book, because there aren't many books that are kind of, you'll get this as a therapist. I can think of many different situations where, like you said, like I wouldn't tell a client you should absolutely stop drinking,
Mm,
because everything is unique. So I really
yeah.
wanted to write a book that took into account different things and really led the reader through their own journey where they
Mm,
get to discover it
yeah.
for themselves.
Yeah.
Because while there's amazing books out that I love, there aren't a ton that kind of talk about this gray area drinking, this middle lane, this truth that a lot of times you can feel lonely when you don't drink because
Right.
you're like left out of certain things. And that does, that can cause more anxiety. So we have to navigate all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting too. And I don't know if I'm getting this research correct, and maybe I'm not, but I'll just talk from an experiential point is there is something, it's sort of similar with cigarettes, I think. There is something calming about holding the wine glass.
Yes.
Even if it's got lemonade in it, for
Yes.
me, there's something celebratory about that. And so the reason I bring that up is that a part of the options for people is to explore the areas. It's funny, I remember my husband many years ago, we'd talk about cigarettes, and he would say, because he works in the film industry, and he would say the people who smoke cigarettes are the ones who actually get a break, because they have to
Mhm.
leave set and they get to go outside and sit on something and kind of breathe and have a moment to
Yeah.
themselves. If you don't smoke, you're lazy if you take a break. And
Yep.
so is that a part of it for you in terms of identifying the benefits and bringing that into your life? Like, I still now drink, you know, like a sparkling cider or something
Yeah.
non-alcoholic in a champagne glass. My kids are always joking about it. Is that a part of the process?
Absolutely. And that's something that I completely agree with you. I think sometimes we don't even want an alcoholic beverage. We want a moment. We want a break. We
So
want
true.
right, a feeling different or celebratory, right? Which is why we take out the wine glass that isn't a regular glass, something
Yeah.
like that. And that is why I really believe, I mean, it depends on the person. And sometimes if someone has more severe drinking, a non-alcoholic beverage initially could be something that's triggering for them. But I am a big believer too. And yeah, like put it in a fancy glass. Like if you enjoy a mocktail, like drink something different than water. You can explore different options. And I think some people are really surprised at how much it's not actually about the drink
Mhm.
sometimes. It's like the ritual of making
Yeah.
a drink or the ritual of using that special glass or the ritual of drinking something that isn't water.
Right. Yes. Or even just the ritual of the day ending, right? Like
Mhm.
I always remember like my parents would be 5 o'clock, right? And at 5 o'clock they would have this is a big my family,
Yeah.
tradition is at 5 o'clock you'd bring out the cheese and the crackers and the grapes and the wine. And it was sort of the end of the day, right? And so I can imagine if someone said we're going to take that away, you'd be like, no, that's how I know the day's over. That's how I
Yes.
move from one thing to the other. And sometimes we do think black and white, like take that, it means you have to take the whole cheese platter away as well.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Absolutely. And I think we don't, right, we can get almost in our heads, right, of like maybe we think we're more dependent on that cheese platter or the wine or whatever without realizing that what we really like about it is the ritual.
Yeah. So if you can share if or not, how does your life look now? Are
Yeah.
you, and for your clients, give me
Yeah.
maybe some context of like what do people arrive at once they've been through this process and how might it be different for different people?
Totally. So I'm completely sober. I don't drink alcohol. I've been sober for 7 years. And in terms of how the process looks for me, I drink mocktails. I drink out of wine glasses sometimes. I love going to, a bar and seeing sometimes if there's like an alcohol free option on a menu. I think that's really fun. And for me, initially when I was thinking about this and working on it, like I said, it was very tied to my eating disorder. But the biggest thing for me is I used to think, well, I can't totally stop drinking because that's like black and white and that's not freedom. Freedom is being able to decide. And I think what is different and unique compared to like an eating disorder, for example, is that alcohol is addictive, right? Like,
Mm.
unlike food, it is an addictive substance that we can live without. And for me, I don't have to think about it if I don't drink. So, what my life looks like now is, I'm sober. I've been sober for 7 years. I enjoy going out to restaurants and getting alcohol free, drinks and things like that. And I used to be really worried that that was too reductive, that I was too black and white if I just said I wanted to be sober. But the truth is, unlike food, alcohol is an addictive substance. When you have one alcoholic beverage, it does create a thirst for itself for most of us. So for me, the freedom is actually not worrying about whether I'm going to drink or not. It's so exhausting for some people, myself included, to be constantly thinking about how much you're going to drink, if you're going to drink, when you're going to drink, what you're going to drink. And now the real freedom for me is I don't drink, I don't think about it. And that's the freedom.
I think that is so beautiful. As you were saying it, I was thinking about me and a Fitbit. I
Mm,
will never be able to wear a Fitbit because
yes.
as soon as I know I could wear it for a day-ish and day two, I'm all obsessive and compulsive. I just know that about myself. And some
Yes.
people can wear it and be fine. And I can never wear a Fitbit. I just can't. It's
Yeah.
my brain goes very like you said on how many what more or
Mhm.
less what's happening. And so I love that you're saying that is really knowing your limits and whether it's the Fitbit, it's not actually the problem, but the
Right.
Fitbit is what starts a lot of like problematic behaviors that I know is just not helpful for me.
Yes. Yes. And I think it's important to recognize there are factors, right, that make us more likely to be able to moderate successfully or not, right? Like the amount of alcohol you've drank throughout your life, your past drinking habits, whether you have a history of addiction in your family or substance use, whether you have trauma, whether you have anxiety, all of these things might make it more difficult for you to moderate compared
Right.
to someone else.
Right. I don't know if this is helpful for our listeners, but I went sober, my husband and I did, for the first year of COVID. What was interesting is then I got put on a medicine where I
Mm,
wasn't allowed to drink. And I felt offended by this medicine because I was like, but you're taking my choices away, right? And so I had to go back, even though I'd made the choice already,
yeah.
I'd had to go back and really address this conversation of like, okay, why does that feel threatening to you? Like, and so, to look at it, because a part of me wanted to be like, no, I'm going to start drinking now just because they told me
Mhm.
I'm not allowed to.
Yes.
It's so funny how our brain gets caught up on things around drinking and the rules and so forth. So I didn't think of it that way until you'd mentioned it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that can be why people kind of rebel against the I'm not an alcoholic mindset. Instead of it being a choice, instead of it being my life is better
Mm,
without drinking. Like, I often say my drinking was kind of like Russian roulette. Like a lot of times it was fine when I drank, but the times where it wasn't fine, I was not willing to put up with
right,
anymore.
right,
And I don't know whether I could drink successfully or not, but it's not a risk that I'm willing to take, and it's not worth it compared to all of the benefits that I have from sobriety. And because of that, it really feels like an empowering choice.
right. Yeah. My last question to you before we hear more about you is, what would you say to the people who are listening who aren't ready to have the conversation with themselves about whether it's helpful or not? It's sort of like, I think I learned in a master's grade, like the stages of change. You're in like a
Yes.
pre-contemplation stage where you're like, I'm not even ready to contemplate this yet. Like, do you have any thoughts for people who are so scared to even look at this?
So yeah, for people who maybe are in that, pre-contemplation, not sure if they want to do the deeper work to question their relationship with alcohol, what I would recommend to them is start by just trying to reduce some of their alcohol
Mm,
intake. They don't have to stop drinking, they don't have to even think about whether it's serving them or not. But there are so many amazing alcohol-free beverages that exist now. I mean, there's alcohol-free beers and wines and all kinds of things. And you could just try swapping like one of your alcoholic beverages with that when you go out or at home and just see how that kind of makes you feel.
mm. Yeah, it's a great response in terms of like, it could be, would you say that's more of the harm reduction model?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Or
Yeah.
someone who's, like not ready or really interested in the big conversation. That's one of the reasons I really support and like the alcohol free beverages and stuff like that, because it gives people, I think, an easier way to step into it. And sometimes even realizing too, like alcohol free beverages can taste really good compared to that the beverage that has alcohol in it. So just kind of
Oh
a
my
gut check
gosh.
of you're not drinking this for the taste.
No, exactly. Sometimes when I have drank alcohol, I'm like, why am I even drinking this? It's not delicious.
It's true.
It's not delicious. I love that you say that about, that I think one of the wins of the world is they are creating more, even just the bottles and the look of them are much
Yes.
nicer than the general or dual looking kind of
Yes.
bottles, which I think is really cool. I love this conversation, and thank you so much for bringing it to me, because I do really believe, particularly in the anxiety field, we are not talking about it enough. So I'm so grateful for you.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that I got to chat about it, because yeah, the anxiety connection is huge.
Yeah. Tell me about your book and all about you. Where can people find you?
Yeah. So my book comes out on January 4th. It's called Not Drinking Tonight. And 2022, because this is out.
Yeah. Yeah. For people who are listening on replay,
Yes.
It'll be out as of 2022. Yeah.
Yeah. It's called Not Drinking Tonight, A Guide to Creating a Sober Life You Love. It is broken up into kind of 3 different sections so that you can learn in the first section why you drink. And I go into kind of evolutionary psychology and trauma and shame. In the second part, it's about reparenting yourself, or like the tools that you need to stay, stopped. So I talk about boundaries and self-care and all of the things, emotional health, how we take care of our emotions. And then in the last section, I talk about moderation, relapsing, the overlap of alcohol use and other substances or ways we numb. So really, though my book is kind of structured around alcohol, I talk a lot about eating disorders, perfectionism, workaholism, other drugs, because I think a lot of it is kind of the same in that
100%,
sense.
100%.
And you can find me on Instagram at Therapy for Women, or my website is amandaewhite.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It's so great to actually have a conversation with you face-to-face, well, as face-to-face as we can be. So thank you so much.
Thank you. This was so great.
Okay, and before we get going, I'm sure you got so much out of that episode. Before we get going onto your week, I wanted to share the I Did a Hard Thing. This one is from Paula, and she said, I started ERP school earlier this year. While looking into my OC cycle, I was surprised to find out that I had some overt compulsions. I thought they were mostly mental, and that's when I figured out I had a BFRB. My loved ones had commented on my hair pulling in the past, but I didn't realize how compulsive it could be. I watched Kimberley's webinar on BFRBs, and I got inspiration to be creative. I tried to use hand lotion so it would make my hands sticky and demotivate hair pulling. I also got a fidget toy to keep my hands occupied whenever I felt like pulling. But what worked best was using a transparent elastic bands to tie up the 2 strands I used to pull. It's perfect because it creates a physical barrier to pulling, but also a sensory reminder. If my fingers feel the band, I can say to myself, oh, the band, that feels different. And because I'm trying to make a change, way to go me. Thank you, Kimberley, for all the amazing work you do. So guys, this is amazing. If you didn't know, if you go to CBT school, we have a free training for people with BFRBs. If you have OCD, we have a free training for people with OCD. So head on over to CBT school and you can get all of the cool resources there. Have a wonderful day, everybody. And thank you so much for the I Did a Hard Thing. That was so cool. I was not expecting that, Paula. Congratulations. You are doing definite hard things. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Please note that this podcast or any other resources from cbtschool.com should not replace professional mental health care. If you feel you would benefit, please reach out to a provider in your area. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for supporting cbtschool.com.